Do opposites attract? Is it better to date someone who is maybe more like you? Is that maybe a smarter decision? Or do opposites really attract and you're better off, going with someone who's different? That's another one of those famous relationship questions that you will hear different opinions about out there. So today I want to share with you my views on this idea of opposites attracting and share with you maybe from my personal experience so that you can see kind of the lens through which I see this whole idea of opposites attracting. So if you are new to my world, my name is Mireille Nicole. I am a relationship coach. And if you don't know my story yet, so I was married, I got divorced, I then found my dream man, and then things started going really rocky and sideways and whatnot. And at that point, I decided I was going to learn everything I needed to learn about relationships to really turn this around. I ended up getting remarried to my dream man, and now I help other women just like you to get over their relationship challenges and make sure they have their happily ever after. So let me talk about my experience with opposites attracting. So like I said, I was married previously, and I have to say in my first marriage, I married someone who's very, very similar to me. So we had a lot of the same values, we had a lot of the same upbringing, we had a lot of the same interests. There were a lot of similarities, just even in terms of just the way we approach situations, we saw situations, all sorts of things. Which is funny because when I was dating at that time, when I was younger, I was really looking for someone who I had a lot of things in common with. That's what we hear a lot of times, right? Find someone that you have a lot of things in common with, that you like doing things together. And yeah, that is great. And I married a great person. We had a good relationship for a long time. And one of the things that ended up happening to me is that I realized there was more to it than that. So after my first marriage, I ended up finding who I called my dream man, right? And I have to say, we were opposites. So I went from a relationship where I had a lot in common with someone. We were the opposite of opposites, right? We had a lot of things in common, to meeting someone that, my heart really called out to, but who was in many ways my opposite. So from all sorts of different perspectives, right? So he was very adventurous, adrenaline. I'm a lot more, toned down, a lot more cautious. And an example I like to share about this, and actually I was talking about this to a friend recently, just in terms of travel, right? Like a great example where I really see that difference between the two of us is when we travel. Like I like planning my trips, ahead of time. I like to know where we're going to go, what we're going to do. Whereas my dream man, my now husband, my opposite, he's like Mr. Adventure. He's like, let's just book the flight wherever we're going on a whim. If it was up to him, we wouldn't even book our accommodations until we got there, right? We would just book a ticket somewhere. We would show up and we would find a place to stay when we're there, which is funny because we've gotten to the point now where we do kind of book our trips on a whim. Usually it's on date night, we're having a great time together, we book a trip, but now I think I've toned him down a little bit. So this whole idea of opposites, right? It's about navigating your differences together. And that's something that I know I've realized in my relationship with my opposite. One of the key success factors to that is really learning how to a certain extent be influenceable and really accepting and really navigating those differences and communication, right? So that's just like one area where we differ. But another big one, and a lot of couples struggle with, is money, right? So we see money in very different ways. It has a different meaning to the both of us, right? For him, money is all about, enjoying life and having fun. And for me, money is like safety, security. Like I'm the one who's always like, okay, what about our future? What about our retirement? What about maintaining our standard of living? And he's like, oh my gosh, we have to enjoy life. We have to do things, have different, have experiences and enjoy the time that we're here. So that's another big way that I would say me and my current husband were very different. Oh, a big one. And I was actually seeing that again today, right? The whole idea of a lot of women I see in the online space, building businesses, who are really working on themselves, really struggle when it comes to a point where they see they're doing a lot of personal development. And I'm like that too, right? They're doing a lot of personal development, but then they notice that their man's not so much into personal development, which actually I like to remind women all the time that personal development, although a lot of men do personal development, of course, is much more of a feminine energy thing. Like a lot of times women are more kind of interested in this. And I mean, that's a generalization, but just to help you keep that perspective, right? When you see that in your relationship. So I'm all about the inner work. I do it all the time. I'm obsessed with it. I run a business helping women do that. And my man is like, no. Like, why do you keep reading these self-help books? Like, read a novel. He's always like, why can't you just read a novel? I'm always reading these books about, self-development and making myself better. And, it's very nonfiction. And he's like, why can't you just read fiction, right? Like, that's a total other area where we are totally different. And I see a lot of women really struggle with that, right? They're always scared to outgrow their husbands or their partners. A lot of times, right, what you'll realize is that it's not so much the fact that whether or not your interests and your values are opposites. Like, obviously you want to find someone who has similarities. We are similar in a lot of different areas. We are even similar, I think, most importantly, in our commitment to one another and to work on things that, even though we're very different, we're both have the similarity of being committed to work towards it. And that's very important. And that's something you can develop in your relationship, right? Like, when things were getting rocky, we had a lot more difficulty in committing to work on things, right? It seems like when you're in those moments when things get really hard and difficult in the relationship, the natural tendency is to run away, right? But the more personal development you do, and you don't do it to stay in a relationship where you're not happy, but the more it gives you the opportunity to reflect, okay, what are the next action steps? Is it really running away, or should I, try something first? Or what can I do to, no matter what happens in the situation, I've grown through it, so I'm not carrying it forward in another relationship. I see opposites attracting like that, right? I think opposites attract. That's what I've experienced, but that's not to say that you have to find someone who is like you, right? It's all about what you desire in your relationship. So it's not about finding someone who's different than you. I think people can have wonderful relationships with people that, they're very similar to, and it all depends on what you're looking for in your relationship. What do you picture your happily ever after looking like? What is that vision that you've had? What is that dream you've had since you were a little girl, right? And it's more about navigating those feelings and that vision than really looking on paper and seeing, oh my gosh, like, we're, polar opposites. Like, this is never going to work out. Just because you're polar opposites doesn't mean you're not going to work out. Just because you're very similar doesn't mean you're going to work out, right? Even if things are perfect on paper, love is more than that. I truly believe that love is beyond a lot of these, really tangible, rational things. I just heard my husband sneeze and it totally distracted me. Like, I literally totally forgot what I was going to say. The other thing I wanted to say, actually, a way I like to compare this whole idea of opposites attracting is to think of a teeter-totter, right? So like, when you're opposites, there can be a lot of differences, but one of the things that will really help you navigate that, and especially like if you're with your dream person and he's the opposite, right? Like, how do you balance things out? And that's something we've noticed for ourselves, right? There were a lot of differences, especially in the beginning, but the more as we were together, the more we did the work, the more you kind of find that like teeter-totter, balancing out. And that's where you're really going to find the sweet spot. We always say that, our differences just bring out the best in each other and make each other better. It makes me do things that are kind of, wild that I would never do otherwise. And for him, it just helps him be, like, I'm very consistent, right? So it helps him be more consistent in areas where normally, he would just fly by the seat of his pants or whatnot, right? There's benefit to both, but it just adds that richness, right? And if I always see it too, like, if you're the same, then you risk being like on the teeter-totter, right? Where you sit on the teeter-totter and you guys are just both at the bottom and then the teeter-totter's up, right? So there's value in having, those differences. And even if you guys have a lot of in common, right, with someone, there's going to be a lot of natural polarity that can happen too, right? So often you'll see couples where if one of the partners is more dominant than the other person will kind of, like shrink down, and vice versa. There's this natural polarity that often happens in relationships. So kind of goes to show how there is something to be said about opposites. It's like a universal law, right? Like in physics, like magnetism, when you think about magnetisms, and it's like the polar opposites that attracts. I've had this, messy all over the place love life. So I always come from the perspective of anything is possible. possible. When I share my perspective on these things, I don't want you to think, okay, or my experience, okay, that's the one way. What I've noticed is I've often experienced both sides. And so I tend to be a lot more neutral, maybe, in sharing some of these opinions. I think you can make it work either way. So that is what I wanted to share with you today. I am super curious to know your thoughts on this topic. Do you believe that opposites attract? Have you ever experienced that for yourself? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I am always curious to get your thoughts on this. I am going to hop off.